What do you get when you take an already spacious and practical hatchback and give it some extra ground clearance and a sportier roofline? Well, you get something like this, the Toyota Urban Criuser Taisor or Taisor or however you want to pronounce it. However, over the course of this review, I'll be referring to this as the Taisor. Now, I'm going to find out whether this car has a space in our market considering it's based on the Glanza, which already exists and sells numbers. All this is a slightly raised version of that. So mechanical package is the same. Who exactly is this car made for? Let's find out. My name is Nishmanya. You're watching NB Drives. Before we get any further in this review, I want to explain how this car has come to be. Now, Toyota and Maruti Suzuki are in a partnership in India and internationally, and both companies have benefited from each other's cars and rebadged them, selling it under their own umbrella. So, Toyota has taken something like the Baleno and made the Glanza of it, taken the Fronx and made the Urban Criuser Taisor of it, and they also co-developed the Grand Vitara and Toyota's Urban Cruiser Highrider. On the other end, Maruti has taken something like the Innova High Cross and sold it as the Invicto. This has helped both car makers as Maruti has been able to go up in segments and offer more premium offering, while Toyota has benefited by getting more budget-oriented cars. And this has definitely paid dividends as Toyota's sales over the last year, 45% of them are constituted by rebadged cars. Now, take that how you will, but it is a profitable model and strategy for the car maker, and hence these rebadged cars exist in our market. Let's talk about how the Taisor is to drive, and there is a decent amount to like about this car. Now, everything that you like from either the Baleno or the Glanza is still here in terms of the way it handles and way the chassis is tuned. So it does feel fairly nimble on its feet. Its center of gravity isn't too high like a lot of other SUVs. And that means that when you're zipping around town, it does feel like it's fairly peppy and it changes direction well. Another thing I'll note is that the steering feels pretty good. There is a decent amount of heft to it even at low speeds. It doesn't weigh up a whole lot when you're going fast, but it's enough feel for you to be comfortable out on the highway at triple digit speeds. Though around town, it does make it feel like it is a little more planted than you'd expect, which is a great thing for a crosshatch like this. You do want it to drive well. Since I'm driving the 1 liter turbo petrol, I'll tell you how that feels to drive. I haven't driven the 1.2 in this particular car, though I have experienced it in the Baleno before. The 1 liter does feel quite punchy, and it's not the nicest of the 1 liter 3-cylinder turbo petrols. I still think that Volkswagen's 1 liter TSI is the better engine. However, this does rev quite freely and it has a decent mid-range. So it does feel like when you get up and going, this car is eager to, push on, give you the kind of performance you're looking for. It makes 100 horsepower and it feels it. If you talk about dynamics, the car does feel quite planted because its center of gravity isn't too high. And for instance, if I chuck it into this corner, it holds its line pretty well. There is a little bit of body roll as you'd expect. The suspension isn't that stiff, but it does hold the line well. And that means that when you do commit to a corner, you aren't worried that it's going to wallow around too much. So in my opinion, it drives fairly well, at least as well as you'd expect a hatchback to drive. Another thing worth pointing out is the fact that the mild hybrid system is not a proper hybrid system. So like at a signal, it'll cut the engine off and the battery under the seat basically helps it restart the motor. Like right now, I put my foot off the brake and it started right back up. So you can expect it to help your mileage, but it is not going to give you crazy good mileage like a proper hybrid system does. And that's reflected in my onboard computer telling me I've been averaging about 15 and a half, 16 kpl in my time driving this car, and I've been driving it not too sedately, so I will own up I can probably drive it a little more efficiently. But in most real world settings, I don't see this going beyond 17, 18 kpl. And that in large part is to one of the big drawbacks, which is this gearbox. I was hoping that this torque converter would be as smooth as some of the other cars that I've driven around in. But the sad reality is that it is a little slow. And I know torque converters aren't the cutting edge of automatic gearboxes, though typically I do prefer them to definitely AMTs because they're essentially just automated manuals and they feel very jerky. And even CVTs, that's something that the old Baleno had. It had this really odd sensation where you'd slam on the throttle, the engine would make a whole lot of noise. We call it rubber banding in the reviewing world, but it wasn't extremely pleasant when you were driving a little spiritedly. So torque converters usually can deal with that a little better in the sense that when you put your foot down, they're eager to drop gears and they hold on to gears better. And to an extent, that is true because the Taisor, when you do put it into manual mode and use these paddle shifters, it will hold gears, no problem. But it's when you use the paddle shifters to drop down, maybe like you're in fourth and you want to go down to third or second, it takes quite a while for it to drop down. And even when you leave it in regular D, it's not very eager to downshift. So all in all, it feels like the gearbox is tuned for efficiency, and that makes you feel like the car is a little more sluggish than it actually is, because there's no reason for it to feel slow around town with the 100 horsepower it has. I just wish they'd done a little better job with the automatic gearbox. Lastly, I want to touch upon the ride of the Taisor. Now, it feels fairly compliant in and around town. I've driven it over some relatively bad sections of road, and it does absorb the bumps relatively well. But I do feel like there is a little bit of firmness, or actually, it's not firmness. You do hear the suspension work quite a bit, and that detracts from refinement, which isn't aided by the fact that even the three-cylinder engine under the hood makes quite a bit of ruckus, especially at low speeds. Like, it rumbles a little too much for a turbo petrol. I was not expecting it to do so. And even at startup, I'll insert a clip of that now. It does have this gruffness to the engine, which I know three cylinders are inherently not extremely well balanced, but there's a little lack of refinement in this. That could also in part be due to the fact that this is a meteor car and it's done about 18,500 kilometers. That's never great for like initial impressions, because I'd say this is equivalent to like a 45,000 kilometer driven car and in tough conditions. So I do feel the overall NVH and refinement of the Taisor is lacking a little bit. I would have expected it to be a little nicer, especially because it is basically designed for you to use it around town. Because let's face it, despite having the extra 20 mm of ground clearance, you're not going off-roading with this. And to that effect, it does not feel like an SUV. This definitely feels very much like a hatchback. You have to slink down into the seat, and it doesn't give you a commanding view out. You're still sat low pretty much at sedan levels. And if somebody in something like a Sonnet or a Venue pulls up next to you, or even a Brezza for that matter, they will be sitting higher. So it doesn't give you that SUV feel, and that's why I think they probably did a slight misstep with counting this as an SUV coupe. I think they should have just labeled it what it is. It's a coupe-esque crosshatch, according to me. That said, added ground clearance is only ever a positive in India, as you never know when it'll come handy given our road conditions are so varied. And lastly, I'll also talk about the braking performance of the car, which is a little underwhelming. Not because it doesn't have the stopping power, but because the brake pedal is a little too spongy feeling and doesn't inspire confidence. The Taisor has been around in our market for a while, so the design is fairly well known. However, I'll go over the few things that make it different than the Fronks. Well, first up, you get this wider grille that's got a honeycomb pattern inside that is much wider and I think a little more aggressive looking than the Fronks. Second is the new daytime running lights you can see on either side of the car. They look very similar to the Urban Cruiser High Rider, its bigger brother, and that makes it look very much in line with the design language of Toyota. That's a good job Toyota has done integrating the Fronks into their lineup. And lastly, you get a wider air dam at the bottom compared to the Fronks. Again, all this helps it look a little more sporty than the Fronks, in my opinion, up front. I think here Toyota has done a great job with the Taisor. But now, if you come around to the side, you will see there is basically no change on the silhouette of this car. As you can imagine, none of the metalwork has been changed. Though Toyota has fitted these rather fetching looking 16-inch alloy wheels. They've got a diamond cut design and they're dual 5-spoke wheels, which I think look really smart. And honestly, if I was to pick between this and the Fronks' wheels, I think these are the outright winners. Given that nothing else has changed, I will say that the silhouette of this car was already pretty good to begin with. I like these character lines and creases that both car companies have incorporated. It gives it a muscular look, and you can see that the roofline is also sloping, hence they call it an SUV coupe. Another thing I really like at the rear is the gap between the tail light and the fender. There's almost like an indent and a crease. This makes the haunches look really wide and it looks very sculpted, giving it a more purposeful and sport stance on the road. That I think is very well executed. Now around the rear, the things that you'll notice are these integrated roof spoiler. As I mentioned, the roof line's already tapering and that continues on into the boot lid. It's got this fairly sharp rake visible in the rear windshield also. I think the angular look works quite well for the Taisor and the Fronks. Now, at the rear, there's not a whole lot that's different compared to the Fronks. Only thing are these tail light LED elements. In the Fronks, it's got this 3-arrow design. Here, it is more in line with the High Rider. Apart from that, you get these reflector strips vertically integrated on either end of the bumper, which gives it a little bit of visual width. And there's a 4 skid plate right here that's painted in silver. It's not a metallic skid plate, so don't get any ideas. You can't go off-roading or off-roading with this front-wheel drive crosshatch. But yeah, apart from that, I think the design looks fairly well integrated and I like how the coupe SUV crossover look has been integrated. In my opinion, it's quite a good looking car. As the overall interior is also not new, I'll rush through all the main points on the inside. It's got a layered dashboard design that's got a two-tone finish. It's black on top, dark brown at the bottom, and there's a silver insert around the middle. I think it looks okay, but it's a little too plasticky for my liking. Now, there is a freestanding infotainment screen here. This is a 9-inch unit, and it is the same as the one you've seen in the Baleno, in the Glanza, and in the Fronks. And it is decent in terms of its responsiveness. So you can see it's quite reactive to the touch, and it's got these capacitor shortcut buttons for your volume, for your home, for your voice assistant, and everything built in down here, which is quite convenient. However, it does look a touch aftermarkety in its appearance, which does detract from the overall polish levels inside here. and it doesn't feel like it's been tailor made for this car. That apart, you do get wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. I have Android Auto connected, and you can see it is again quite responsive out here. And if you step back out of this into the regular apps, you'll see it is quite responsive, has everything you need. And honestly, most of the time, you're going to spend your time in Android Auto, which works quite well. I also like the fact that you do still have access to your shortcuts even when you're in Android Auto. That's because they've capacitively built these shortcuts in. One thing I don't like is how easy the voice assistant just starts up, like it did right now. I've faced this multiple times over the course of driving this car, and yeah, it gets a little irritating. Now, for the steering wheel, it is quite chunky. I like how it feels in the hand. It's a 3-spoke unit, and the physical controls for your media. And you have modes here to control the MID in between your gauge cluster, which is quite cool. This has an analog gauge cluster, which I don't mind because sometimes on budget cars, when they put digital clusters, they look very cheap. And out here, at least you're getting nice traditional 3D dials, which look quite good. Back to the steering wheel, you get your phone connectivity and voice assistant controls down here. You get your cruise control stuff on this side of the steering wheel. And you can see there are paddle shifters on either side. That is quite nice and sporty, in my opinion. The last big party trick up front is the head-up display, which you can access by pressing this button. So when you long press, you will see that the head-up display rises and it gives you your recharge percentage, your speed, time, gear, and when you have navigation going, it'll give you navigation tones as well. Apart from that, you get physical switches for your climate controls, which is a big plus in my book. Here you can see the climate controls are operated via these toggles. This side is temperature, that side's fan. And you have your recirculation AC button or button dedicated for off. It's lovely to have physical switches for climate controls again. Now, in terms of charging for your devices, you have a wireless charger here. Here's your wireless charger, which can be activated just by putting your phone there. There's a Type A USB port for data. So, if you're doing wired Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, there is also a 12-volt socket right here. You get this armrest in the center, which is adjustable. So, you can move it forward, backward, depending on where your elbow rests for added comfort. It's quite nice, though it's not a central console that you can lift up and store stuff under. And another big miss on this car is the fact that there are no ventilated front seats. There are no electric seats either. So those are two big-ish misses considering that a lot of compact SUVs do offer those features. Now, apart from that, your storage spaces are decent. You can fit a 1 liter bottle in the door bin out here, as well as in these two cup holders out here. It's plenty of space. And you get a reasonably sized glove box. I wouldn't say it's very big, but it is okay for carrying your user manual and other papers as per your requirements. And lastly, before we move to the back, I will say these seats, they are quite comfortable. They are quite accommodating also. I have a big build and I feel fairly comfortable. Though I think on slightly longer trips, because of how soft the cushioning feels, you might start feeling a little more fatigued quicker. And that for anyone who's done long distances, you'll understand. The slightly firmer seat sometimes is better for long drives than just outright soft cushion seats. But for city commute, I think this will be perfect. While I'm in the front, I'll also say that the sound system on this is pretty okay. It's nothing to write home about, but it does get the job done. There's a decent amount of bass and mid range in it. It gets a little tinny when you go to the higher ranges of stuff. Now I'm in the back of the Taisor and you can see there's a fair amount of space back here, and I'm actually quite surprised with how good the amount of room here is. Now, I'm 6 foot tall. The driver's seat is set to my driving position, And you can see I have about 3 inches of knee room, which is already pretty good. I also have a reasonable amount of foot room under the front seat, so I can tuck my feet and stretch out a little bit. And yeah, the only downside here is the headroom. Now, if I sit upright, my head is brushing up against the roof liner. However, if I tuck down a little bit, it's acceptable. I won't say it's roomy, and I do know from experience that the Glanza and Baleno are a little better. So you are losing a little bit of headroom here this because of that sloping roof line. But I am a large person. Shorter people will be fairly comfortable back here. Now, there are not a whole lot of amenities for you. What you do get is one seat back pocket here for magazine or other literature. You get AC vent out here, which has two sets of direction controls. So it's not independent vents that can be pointed up or down separately, but you can do the left and right adjustment. You get two Type C chargers down here, which is quite good considering how much we all use our phones, especially the passengers at the rear. And another thing I really like is the fact that we get independent headrests for all three passengers. That said, I do miss the fact that there's no armrest here. So it's not as comfortable as it could be. There's no integrated sunlight here either. But then for this price point, I'm not really expecting it. And yeah, that's about all the frills you get at the back here. The plastics are again scratchy like they are in the front. And you do get a little bit of padding on the armrest area, which is nice, adds to the comfort. However, the other thing that you should consider is if you're carrying three abreast, uh, there is a little bit of a transmission tunnel in the middle here, which will make it difficult to seat three comfortably because one, the headroom gets even tighter. This seat has me sat a little higher up, it's a little firm in the middle. And because of that central tunnel, I'm going to eat into the leg space of both passengers on either side. So this is most comfortable for a two occupant setup at the rear rather than three. So on a crunch, you can possibly use it. Coming to the boot of the Taisor, it is actually quite practical back here. There is about 308 liters of boot space, and you can see my 28-liter backpack gets swallowed in quite easily. Now, there's a little bit of an issue with the boot, which is its high boot lip. That means anytime you're loading heavy suitcases, you're really gonna have to like pick it up and then topple it over into the boot. This shape of the boot itself is quite usable, but it will be a little bit of extra work for anyone loading the boot in. Now, in terms of overall space, you can easily fit 3 to 4 cabin bag size suitcases in here, or maybe two large suitcases and some soft bags. Additionally, if you need the space, the second row folds down 60-40 split, so that'll give you extra space in case you're ever doing a very big airport run and only have two occupants in the car. That's the driver and a passenger. Now coming to the all-important pricing of the Taisor. In this turbo petrol, guys, with the manual gearbox, the price ranges between 9.8 and 10.8 lakhs, while with the automatic, like the one I'm driving here, it ranges between 11.7 odd lakhs to just over 12 lakhs, which does make it fairly pricey. And I think for most people, it is going to be the standard 1.2 liter naturally aspirated engine version of the Taisor that they're going to go with. That with the manual starts at about 7 lakhs, and with the automatic, it goes up to around 10 lakhs. I'll put the exact price list somewhere here on the screen. So coming down to the verdict of this car, well, there's a lot that is to be liked about it. And if you are somebody who's going to drive it yourself, you like the coupe-esque design of it, which I'll have to admit does look really nice in person, and you plan on taking it out of town, maybe doing some highway driving or even going up to the hills, it can be quite compelling, especially with that added 20 mm of ground clearance. There's a little bit more peace of mind that you'll have tackling some broken sections of road. However, I would say that this entire package would be more fun with the manual gearbox, especially with the turbo petrol. I think that'd be a more engaging drive because the torque converter did let me down a little bit. It was a little sluggish. And honestly, I know most people will end up buying the 1.2 liter naturally aspirated engine. That'll give better mileage, it is better suited for the city, and I think it has a more linear power delivery in any case. So, for most folk, that is the version that I would recommend. Now, as per my channel's rating system, I would definitely say you should consider the Taisor. There's a lot to like about this overall package. It's got a solid interior, it's got decent performance, and it's quite the looker in person. However, it's hard to recommend with that slightly high pricing of it against some of the other compact SUVs in the market. That space is just so competitive. This is more for people who do want a hatchback but want a little bit of that added sense of ease and security with the ground clearance. However, even there, compared to the Glanza, you are losing some practicality with this sloping roof. That's worth keeping in mind when you go in for the final purchase decision. So, you guys let me know, what would you purchase if you had a 10 to 15 lakh budget and you wanted a crossover of sorts? Is this something that would be at the top of your list, or would you pick one of the other mid-size SUVs? Let me know in the comments down below, and until next time, cheers.